"You can't make us like you," Christopher screamed, his 6-year-old voice cracking with rage as he hurled a designer toy truck across the penthouse bedroom. It crashed against the wall inches from Betty's head, leaving a dent in the expensive wallpaper. "We'll break you like all the others." Betty Johnson stood frozen in the doorway, watching 3 identical blonde boys turn their luxury bedroom into a battlefield. Alexander had barricaded himself behind an overturned dresser, ammunition of stuffed animals piled beside him. Benjamin stood on the bed, tears streaming down his face, ripping pages from a storybook, the same book their mother used to read to them before she died. Paint splattered the white walls. Feathers from torn pillows floated through the air like snow. Broken toys littered the floor like casualties of war. The destruction was spectacular, expensive, and absolutely heartbreaking. But what shocked Betty most wasn't the chaos. It wasn't even that these were the sons of a billionaire, destroying thousands of dollars worth of belongings without a second thought. It was the terror in their eyes. "We don't want another nanny," Alexander shouted from behind his fortress, his voice small and desperate. "We want our mama." Christopher picked up another toy, ready to throw. His hands were shaking. His face was streaked with tears and dirt. "You'll leave just like all the others. They all leave." 19 nannies in 7 months. 19 women who'd walked through that door with confidence and credentials, only to quit within days, sometimes hours. One had lasted 45 minutes. Another had to be treated for a bite wound. A third had her car keyed in the building's parking garage. The Kirkpatrick triplets had a reputation. They were labeled as feral, damaged, impossible. The nanny agencies had blacklisted the family. No one wanted this job. But as Betty looked at these 3 blonde boys standing in the wreckage of their grief, she didn't see monsters. She saw herself at 16, standing in the ruins of her own life after Jamal was shot 3 blocks from home. She saw the same desperate fear, the same wild need to push everyone away before they could leave first, before they could abandon you the way death had abandoned you with your pain. These boys weren't bad, they were drowning, and everyone who'd come before her had tried to pull them out by force, when what they really needed was someone willing to dive in and drown with them for a while. Betty took a slow breath and did something no other nanny had done. She sat down, right there on the floor, in the middle of the chaos, in her Sunday-best navy dress that she'd worn to impress a billionaire. She sat cross-legged among the broken toys and torn pages and spilled paint, and she looked at each boy with eyes that had seen their kind of pain before. "You're right," she said softly, her voice carrying the warmth of her grandmother's kitchen on Sunday mornings. "You're absolutely right to be scared of me." The boys froze, confused. Adults weren't supposed to agree with them. "I know y'all are terrified," Betty continued, not moving, not demanding they calm down or clean up or behave. Just sitting. Just being present in their storm. "I know you think if you push hard enough, I'll leave before you get attached. Before you start to love me. Before I can hurt you the way losing your mama hurt you." Christopher's hand, still holding a toy, began to lower. "But baby boys," Betty said, her eyes filling with tears that she didn't try to hide, "I didn't come here to leave. And you can't break what's already been broken and put back together stronger." Benjamin stopped ripping pages. Alexander peered out from behind his fortress. "My baby brother died when I was 16, Betty said quietly. "Jamal. He was 14 years old and someone shot him 3 blocks from our house on a Tuesday afternoon. And for a long time after that, I did exactly what you're doing right now. I broke things. I pushed people away. I tried to make everyone leave before they could abandon me." She looked at each of their faces, these 3 beautiful boys who the world had given up on. "So here's what I'm going to tell you. You can throw things at me. You can scream and cry and test me every single day. You can be as mean as you need to be." Betty's voice was steady, certain, unshakable. "But I'm not going anywhere. And by the end of today, I'm going to show you something that will change everything." "What?" Benjamin whispered, his voice barely audible. Betty smiled, soft and sad, and full of understanding. "I'm going to show you that it's okay to let someone new care about you, even when your heart is broken. That loving me won't mean forgetting your mama, and that you don't have to be alone in this pain anymore." The room went quiet except for the distant hum of Chicago traffic 52 floors below. And in that moment something shifted. Not a transformation, because healing doesn't work that way. But Christopher's shoulders dropped just slightly. Alexander took one small step out from behind his fortress, and Benjamin, the youngest, asked the question that would change all their lives. "You promise you won't leave?" Betty held out her hand, palm up, an invitation, not a demand. "Baby boys, I keep my promises." 7 months earlier, Fredrick S. Kirkpatrick sat in his corner office on the 52nd floor of Kirkpatrick Tower, staring at the divorce papers that would never be signed. Except they weren't divorce papers. They were Victoria's death certificate, and he kept them in his desk drawer like some kind of punishment he deserved to carry. His phone buzzed for the 4th time that morning. He knew before answering it would be either his assistant Margaret with another nanny crisis, or the boys' private school with another incident report. Lately, it was always both. "Mr. Kirkpatrick," Margaret's voice was tight with exhaustion. "I'm afraid I have difficult news." Fredrick pressed his fingers against his temples, feeling the familiar pressure building behind his eyes. "Let me guess. The school called." "Yes, sir." Christopher bit his teacher during circle time. Alexander locked himself in the art supply closet and refused to come out for 2 hours, and Benjamin started screaming during quiet reading and threw books at the other children. She paused. "They're asking you to pick them up immediately." Fredrick closed his eyes. His sons, his beautiful, brilliant boys who used to build elaborate Lego cities and beg him to read just one more bedtime story. Now, they were strangers wearing his children's faces, destroying everything and everyone who tried to get close. "And the nanny situation?" he asked, though he already knew. "Mrs. Patterson quit this morning." Christopher bit her arm hard enough to break skin. "She's threatening legal action unless we provide a substantial settlement." Margaret's voice softened. "Sir, that's 19 nannies in 7 months. The agencies are blacklisting us. Word has gotten around about the boys, and what?" Fredrick's voice came out sharper than he intended. "And no one wants to work for the Kirkpatrick family anymore. Your sons have a reputation." Fredrick stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Down below, life moved forward like nothing had changed. But his world had stopped 7 months ago on a yacht off the coast of Monaco, where Victoria had been celebrating the biggest merger of his career. The champagne had been flowing. The deal was worth $800 million, and his wife had stepped onto the deck at precisely the wrong moment when the boom swung across. 1 second. That's all it took for everything to shatter. The boys blamed him. They never said it out loud, but Fredrick saw it in their eyes every time they looked at him. Mama died celebrating Daddy's work. Mama chose Daddy's business over staying home with us. It didn't matter that Victoria had insisted on going, that she'd been so proud of him, that she'd wanted to be there. All the boys knew was that she'd gotten on that yacht because of him, and she'd never come home. "Mr. Kirkpatrick?" Margaret's voice pulled him back. "What should I do about finding a new nanny?" Fredrick was worth $3.8 billion. He'd built an empire from a single real estate investment. He'd negotiated with presidents and princes. He'd never met a problem that money couldn't solve, until now. "Post an ad," he said quietly. "Offer triple the standard rate." Someone out there must be desperate enough. But Fredrick had no idea that the woman who would answer his ad wouldn't be desperate at all. She would be exactly what his sons needed, even if the world would question whether she belonged in their lives. Betty Johnson sat in her studio apartment on Chicago's South Side, scrolling through job listings while rain drummed against the window that overlooked the street where her brother had died 16 years ago. She could still see the exact spot if she leaned far enough to the left. Sometimes she wondered if that was healing or torture, but the rent was cheap and she sent most of her paycheck to her grandmother anyway. At 32, Betty had been a nanny for 8 years. She loved working with children, loved the way they saw the world before life taught them to be afraid of it. But lately, the job market had been brutal. Families wanted younger nannies with fancy degrees from places like Northwestern or DePaul. They wanted certifications in Montessori methods and infant CPR and childhood development theories with names Betty couldn't pronounce. What they didn't want was a black woman from the South Side with a high school diploma and a resume that read like a prayer for second chances. She was about to close her laptop when a posting caught her eye. Seeking experienced caregiver for 3 energetic boys. Previous caregivers found the position emotionally challenging. Competitive compensation for the right candidate. Betty almost scrolled past it. The address alone, Kirkpatrick Tower Penthouse, told her everything she needed to know. This was money she'd never touched, a world she'd never entered. The kind of place where women like her came through the service entrance and left before the family woke up, but something about those carefully chosen words made her pause. Emotionally challenging. That was rich people speak for, "Our children are falling apart, and we don't know how to catch them." She clicked on the listing and found the name, Fredrick S. Kirkpatrick. She Googled him and felt her breath catch. There it was, 6 months ago, splashed across every news site. Billionaire's wife dies in tragic yachting accident. Victoria Kirkpatrick, 34, leaving behind husband and triplet sons. Betty read every article she could find. She studied the photos of 3 blonde boys with their mother's smile, standing in front of a Christmas tree that probably cost more than Betty's annual salary. She read about the 19 nannies who'd quit. She read the whispered rumors about behavioral issues and unmanageable children. And she recognized every single thing those boys were doing because she'd done it too. When Betty was 16 and the police knocked on her door to tell her that Jamal had been shot 3 blocks from home, something inside her had shattered. She'd pushed away every guidance counselor, every church lady, every well-meaning adult who'd tried to help. She'd broken things and screamed, and made herself so difficult that people would leave before she got attached, before they could abandon her the way death had abandoned her with her grief. Those boys weren't bad. They were terrified. Betty spent the next 3 hours writing an application that was nothing like any resume she'd ever sent. No polished language. No careful bullet points listing her qualifications. Just truth. "Mr. Kirkpatrick," she typed, her fingers trembling slightly. "I don't have a college degree in child development. I don't have certificates from expensive programs. What I have is this. When I was 16, my baby brother was killed 3 blocks from my house. I raised my younger siblings while my mama worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. I know what it feels like when your world ends and everyone expects you to act normal. I know what it's like to push people away because it hurts less than being left. Your sons aren't broken. They're protecting themselves the only way they know how, and I think I can help them if you'll give me the chance." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, before she could remember all the reasons why a woman like her had no business applying for a job like this. Fredrick sat in his home office the next morning, dreading the interviews Margaret had arranged. The penthouse was eerily quiet with the boys at school, but he knew that peace was temporary. By 3 o'clock they'd return like a storm system, and whoever he hired today would face the full force of their grief-fueled rage. The first candidate arrived at precisely 9. She was a British woman in her 50s who carried herself like she'd raised royalty. "Mr. Kirkpatrick," she said crisply, smoothing her skirt as she sat, "I understand your children have behavioral issues. I've worked with the most difficult families in London. What these boys need is proper discipline and firm boundaries. Structure, sir? Children thrive on structure." Fredrick listened to her talk about schedules and consequences and behavioral modification, and all he could think was that his sons didn't need to be controlled like wild animals. They needed to be seen as the heartbroken children they were. The second candidate was younger, fresh from some prestigious Montessori training program. She spoke enthusiastically about restructuring their environment and age-appropriate learning stations, and redirecting negative energy into creative outlets. She smiled too much, like she thought she could simply out-cheerful their trauma. The third was a behavioral therapist who spent 20 minutes using clinical terms: oppositional defiant disorder, reactive attachment disorder, complicated grief response. She talked about his sons like they were case studies instead of children who'd watched their mother's casket lowered into the ground. By the time the fourth candidate left, Fredrick felt hollow. None of these people understood. They saw problems to be solved, behaviors to be managed, children to be fixed. Then Betty arrived. She stood at his door in a simple navy dress that looked like Sunday service clothes, pressed and clean, but clearly not designer. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she carried herself with quiet dignity that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with character. "Mr. Kirkpatrick," she said, her voice warm and steady, "I'm Betty Johnson. Thank you for meeting with me." As they walked to his office, Fredrick noticed she wasn't gawking at the penthouse's expensive art or the panoramic city views that most people couldn't help but stare at. She was looking at the family photos on the walls, lingering on the ones of Victoria with the boys. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Johnson," he said as they sat. Betty took a breath, meeting his eyes directly. "Mr. Kirkpatrick, I'm going to be honest with you because I think you're tired of people telling you what they think you want to hear. I don't have a college degree. I never went to some fancy school to study child development. What I have is 8 years of loving children that society gave up on, and a heart that knows what your boys are living through." Fredrick leaned forward, something stirring in his chest. "I lost my baby brother when I was 16, Betty continued. Jamal was 14. Shot 3 blocks from home on a Tuesday afternoon. And for a long time after that I was so angry and so scared that I pushed everyone away. I broke things. I hurt people who were trying to help me. Because if I could make them leave first, it wouldn't hurt so bad when they eventually did." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes holding his. "Your sons aren't trying to be difficult, Mr. Kirkpatrick. They're trying to survive. They're testing every person who walks through that door to see if they'll stay when things get hard. Because the person they loved most in this world left without saying goodbye, and they're terrified it'll happen again." Fredrick felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been frozen solid since Victoria died. "Every other nanny has said my sons are impossible to manage. That's because they're trying to manage them instead of love them, Betty said simply. Your boys don't need management, sir. They need someone who won't flinch when they test her love. Someone who understands that broken doesn't mean unfixable. For the first time in 7 months, Fredrick felt hope. Betty arrived at the penthouse the next morning at 7, carrying a thermos of coffee for Fredrick and a canvas bag filled with her grandmother's pancake ingredients. She'd barely set her things down when she heard the thunder of small feet and the unmistakable sound of something crashing in the kitchen. She found 3 identical blonde boys engaged in what could only be described as warfare. Syrup dripped from the marble countertops. Orange juice pooled on the floor. Christopher, the ringleader she'd been warned about, stood on a chair with an entire bottle of maple syrup raised above his head like a weapon. "Food fight," he yelled when he saw her in the doorway, his blue eyes blazing with defiant challenge. The other nannies would have screamed, would have demanded they stop immediately, would have threatened consequences and called for their father. Betty laughed. "Y'all are really committed to this mess, huh?" she said, walking calmly into the chaos. "I'm actually impressed. This takes real dedication." She grabbed a dish towel and wiped the syrup off her arm. "Though I gotta say, you're wasting some perfectly good syrup when we could be eating it on pancakes instead." The boys froze, confused. This wasn't how adults were supposed to react. "You're not going to yell at us?" Alexander asked suspiciously. "Why would I yell? Yelling never fixed anything." Betty pulled ingredients from her bag. "Besides, I bet y'all are hungry after all that throwing. My grandmama taught me how to make the best pancakes on the South Side. You want some?" Within 20 minutes, the boys were sitting at the kitchen table, sticky and wary but sitting, while Betty worked at the stove. The smell of butter and vanilla filled the kitchen. "My baby brother Jamal used to love these pancakes," Betty said conversationally as she flipped one. "He'd eat 6 of them if Grandmama let him. He was scared of thunderstorms, though. Used to crawl into my bed every time it rained." Benjamin, the youngest, looked up. "What happened to him?" "He died when I was 16, Betty said simply, sliding pancakes onto their plates. "Someone shot him 3 blocks from our house. And it hurt so bad, I thought I might die too." The boys were completely still now, watching her. "Your mama probably knew what you were scared of, didn't she?" Betty asked gently. Christopher's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared I'm going to forget her voice," he whispered. "Sometimes I try to remember what she sounded like when she said goodnight, and I can't." Betty pulled out her phone and scrolled through her videos. "You know what I do when that happens? I watch these." She showed them a shaky video of Jamal dancing in their living room, his voice bright with laughter. "I must have watched this 1,000 times. Your daddy probably has videos of your mama, too. We could ask him." "Really?" Benjamin's voice was tiny with hope. "Really? And baby boys, here's what I learned. Missing someone doesn't mean forgetting them. It means loving them, even though they're not here anymore." Alexander reached across the table and held his brother's hands. "Do you still miss Jamal?" "Every single day," Betty said. "But it doesn't hurt the same way it used to. That's what happens when you let people help you carry it." From the hallway, Fredrick stood frozen in the doorway, watching this woman he'd hired less than 24 hours ago accomplish what 19 nannies couldn't do in 7 months. His sons were talking. Really talking. About Victoria, about their fear, about their pain. And for the first time since the funeral, they looked like children instead of soldiers defending a battlefield. 3 weeks into Betty's employment, someone with a camera phone captured a moment that would change everything. Betty was walking the boys to their private school. Christopher's small hand tucked safely in hers, while Alexander and Benjamin swung from her arms, all four of them laughing at some joke Benjamin had told about dinosaurs. The morning sun caught them perfectly. A black woman in a simple coat and three blonde boys who looked at her like she hung the moon. The photo appeared on Twitter within an hour. "Billionaire Fredrick Kirkpatrick's children with their new nanny," read the caption. By lunch, it had 10,000 shares. By dinner, it was everywhere. Betty didn't see it until Margaret called, her voice tight with worry. "Miss Johnson, I think you should know there's a photo circulating online. Mr. Kirkpatrick wants to discuss how to handle it." But when Betty opened Twitter, her stomach dropped. It wasn't the photo that devastated her. It was the comments. Why would he hire her to raise white children? This is completely inappropriate. Those boys need someone from their own background. Look at how she's touching them. This makes me uncomfortable. There are plenty of qualified white nannies. This is virtue signaling at best, dangerous at worst. The words kept coming, an endless scroll of poison dressed up as concern. Betty sat on her bed, reading until her hands shook, until she felt 16 again and small and powerless against a world that had already decided what she was worth. By the next morning, news outlets had picked up the story. Not the major networks yet, but the cable shows and online publications that thrived on manufactured controversy. Questions raised about Kirkpatrick Children's Caregiver, read one headline. Billionaire's unconventional childcare choice sparks debate, read another. They found 3 former nannies willing to talk. Mrs. Patterson, whose arm Christopher had bitten, appeared on camera with her injury prominently displayed. "Those children are dangerous," she said. "They need professional intervention, not—" She paused meaningfully. Someone who may not be equipped to handle children from such a different background. The second nanny was more direct. "I question whether she has the proper training and education to care for children of this caliber. There are standards in this profession." The third twisted the knife deepest. "Those boys need stability and structure from someone who understands their world. I'm just concerned about whether this situation is appropriate." Betty's phone started buzzing with messages from numbers she didn't recognize. She made the mistake of opening one. "You don't belong in that house. Know your place." Then another. "Those aren't your kids. Stop pretending like you're their mother." And another, worse than the others. "We know where you live. Stay away from those white children, or there will be consequences." Betty sat in her small bedroom in the staff wing of the penthouse, staring at the threats, feeling the old familiar fear creeping up her spine. She'd survived the South Side. She'd survived losing Jamal. She'd survived being passed over and underestimated her entire life. But this felt different. This was the whole world telling her she didn't deserve to love these children. That her love was somehow dangerous because of the color of her skin. In the living room, she could hear the boys playing. Christopher's laugh echoed down the hallway, the same laugh that had been absent for 7 months until Betty coaxed it back to life. She had a choice to make. And the whole world was watching. Betty spent the morning avoiding the news, focusing on the boys' breakfast and their spelling homework and anything that felt normal. But at noon, while the boys played in the living room, the television was on in the background, and a news anchor's voice cut through everything. The controversy continues over billionaire Fredrick Kirkpatrick's choice of caregiver for his 3 sons, who sources say have been out of control since their mother's death 7 months ago. Questions remain about whether the current nanny is qualified to handle such challenging children. Betty lunged for the remote, but it was too late. Alexander stood frozen in the middle of the room, his toy truck dangling from his hand. "Out of control?" he whispered. Is that what people think we are?" Christopher's face crumpled. "They said Betty's not qualified. What does that mean?" "It means they think I'm not smart enough to take care of you," Betty said quietly, clicking off the television. Benjamin started crying first, fat tears rolling down his cheeks. "Are you going to leave because people are being mean?" "Everyone always leaves." Alexander joined in, his small body shaking. "We'll be better. We promise. Please don't go." Betty's heart shattered. These boys, these beautiful, wounded boys who'd finally started to heal, thought the world's hatred was their fault. She took each of their hands and led them to their bedroom, the one with the large windows overlooking the glittering city. She knelt on the floor so she was at their eye level, gathering all three of them close. "Listen to me, baby boys, look at me." 6 eyes, blue as their mother's, stared back at her through tears. "I've been underestimated my whole life," Betty said, her voice steady even as her own tears threatened. "People have always assumed I couldn't do things because of how I look. They've told me I wasn't smart enough, wasn't good enough, didn't belong in certain spaces." She touched each of their faces gently. "But you know what? Their doubt never defined my worth. Their assumptions never changed who I was inside. But they're saying such mean things," Christopher sobbed. "I know, sweetheart, and it hurts. But their hate won't make me abandon you. Their ignorance won't make me believe I don't belong right here with you three." Betty pulled them closer. "You are my boys. Not because I gave birth to you, but because I choose you every single day. And nothing, not mean comments, not news reports, not people who think they know better, nothing will make me leave you." "Promise?" Benjamin whispered against her shoulder. "I promise on everything I love. I'm not going anywhere." They stayed like that for a long time, 4 people holding each other in a world that wanted to tear them apart. Eventually, the boys' breathing evened out. Betty shifted to the bed, and they climbed up with her. Nestling against her sides, she sang softly, an old hymn her grandmother used to sing, until one by one they fell asleep. Hours later, Fredrick came home from the office, exhausted from fighting fires all day, calls from board members concerned about publicity, messages from business partners asking if he'd considered the optics, pressure from his PR team to make a statement. He found them in the boys' bedroom. Betty lay on her back in her work clothes, still wearing her shoes, clearly having never meant to fall asleep. Christopher was tucked under her left arm, Alexander under her right, and Benjamin sprawled across her middle. All 4 of them breathing peacefully in the soft glow of the nightlight. Fredrick stood at the floor-to-ceiling window in his suit, looking out at the city lights, and felt something shift in his chest. This woman had sacrificed her safety, her reputation, her peace, all to keep a promise to 3 boys who weren't even hers. And somewhere between watching her fight for his sons and seeing her refuse to abandon them when the whole world gave her permission to leave, Fredrick realized he was falling in love with Betty Johnson. The doorbell rang at 9 in the morning, and Betty knew before opening it that everything was about to get worse. The woman standing in the hallway wore a bureaucratic expression and carried a tablet and a leather folder that screamed official business. "I'm Mrs. Chen from Child Protective Services," she said, showing her credentials. "We've received multiple complaints regarding the welfare of the Kirkpatrick children. I'm here to conduct a home assessment." Betty's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady. "Of course, please come in." Mrs. Chen stepped into the penthouse, her eyes already scanning for evidence of whatever the complaints had alleged. "I want to be transparent with you, Miss Johnson. The complaints specifically mentioned concerns about," she paused delicately, cultural differences in caregiving approaches, and questions about whether the children are receiving appropriate supervision. Translation: people reported her for being black. "The boys are in the kitchen," Betty said quietly. "We're baking this morning." They found Christopher, Alexander, and Benjamin standing on step stools around the kitchen island, flour dusting their hands and noses. The kitchen smelled like butter and cornmeal, and the boys were giggling as Betty had been showing them how to fold the batter just right. "Mrs. Chen, these are Mr. Kirkpatrick's sons," Betty said. "Boys, we have a visitor who wants to talk to us about how we're doing." Christopher, ever the spokesperson, wiped his hands on his apron and extended one to Mrs. Chen with unexpected formality. "Hello, we're making cornbread. Betty's teaching us her grandmama's recipe." Mrs. Chen shook his hand, clearly surprised by his composure. "That's wonderful. Can you tell me what else you've been doing with Miss Betty?" "We're making Mama's memory box today," Benjamin said, pointing to a decorated shoebox on the counter covered in stickers and drawings. "Betty says we should remember happy things about her, not just be sad all the time." "We put pictures in it," Alexander added, "and Mama's favorite scarf that still smells like her perfume, and a recording of her singing us Happy Birthday last year." Mrs. Chen's expression softened. "That sounds like a beautiful way to remember your mother. How do you feel when you work on the memory box?" "Sometimes I cry," Benjamin admitted. "But Betty says that's okay. She says crying means we loved Mama so much." "And it doesn't mean we can't be happy again," Christopher said. "Betty told us Mama would want us to be happy." Mrs. Chen spent the next 2 hours observing. She watched Betty help the boys articulate their feelings about their mother's death. She saw the structured routine, breakfast, learning activities, outdoor time, all delivered with warmth instead of rigidity. She noted the clean, safe environment and the boys' obvious attachment to Betty. What surprised her most was when Fredrick came home early from work, something Margaret had arranged, and immediately got on the floor to play blocks with his sons. Betty had clearly been coaching him, teaching him how to be present instead of just providing. "Daddy, look!" Alexander showed him a tower. "I made it as tall as you." Fredrick's face transformed with genuine joy. "That's amazing, buddy. Should we see if we can make it even taller together?" Mrs. Chen pulled Betty aside before leaving. "Miss Johnson, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen every kind of family situation imaginable." She glanced at the boys, who were now showing Fredrick their memory box. "These children aren't neglected. They're not in danger. They're healing." Betty felt tears prick her eyes. "My report will reflect that this family is functioning remarkably well given their circumstances," Mrs. Chen continued. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Those boys are lucky to have you." After she left, Betty sat at the kitchen table and let herself cry, not from fear this time, but from relief. 6 months after the CPS visit, Betty received an invitation that should have felt like vindication. Morning Chicago wanted to interview her about her work with the Kirkpatrick family, a human interest story about healing and unconventional caregiving. Margaret advised against it, but Betty thought maybe, just maybe, this could be a chance to change the narrative. She should have trusted her instincts. The studio was bright and cold, and the host, Diane Marshall, smiled with too many teeth as Betty sat down. The interview started pleasantly enough. Questions about the boys' progress, about Betty's approach to childcare. Then Diane leaned forward with practiced concern. "Now, Betty, I think we have to address the elephant in the room. You don't have a college degree, correct? No formal training in child development?" Betty felt the trap closing. "That's correct, but I have 8 years of experience. Don't you think these children of immense privilege and resources, would benefit from someone more educated, someone with credentials from accredited institutions?" the audience murmured. Betty's hands clenched in her lap. "I think children benefit from people who love them and understand their pain," Betty said carefully. Diane's smile sharpened. "Let's talk about the power imbalance here. You're an employee in this household. These aren't your children. Are you concerned about becoming too attached, about overstepping boundaries? I'm concerned about 3 boys who needed someone to stay," Betty said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And I don't think loving them is overstepping. But surely you can see how some might find this situation complicated. A black woman with no formal education raising white children of extreme wealth. The optics alone." The studio door burst open. Fredrick Kirkpatrick strode onto the set in his work suit, his face tight with fury. "I'm sorry. Are we really doing this?" His voice cut through the studio like a blade. "Are we really sitting here questioning whether the woman who saved my son's lives is qualified because she doesn't have the right piece of paper on her wall?" "Mr. Kirkpatrick, and this is a private interview," Diane started. "You want to talk about qualifications?" Fredrick moved to stand beside Betty's chair. "Betty has the only qualification that matters. She loves my sons like they're her own. She's the reason they're thriving. She's the reason they can talk about their mother without falling apart. She's the reason I learned how to be a present father instead of just a provider." He looked directly into the camera. "And if you can't see that, if you're so blinded by your prejudice that you think a degree matters more than dedication, then the problem isn't her credentials, it's your racism." The studio went silent. Then another door opened, and 3 blonde boys in matching school uniforms ran onto the set. "Daddy, Betty," Christopher called out. Margaret appeared behind them, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry, sir, they insisted." "Betty," Alexander climbed into her lap, looking at Diane with fierce protectiveness. "Why is that lady being mean to you?" Christopher stood beside Fredrick, his small hand finding his father's. "Betty is our family. She stayed when everyone else left. She taught us it's okay to miss Mama and still be happy." Benjamin wrapped his arms around Betty's neck. "We love Betty. Don't you say mean things about her." Diane Marshall sat speechless as the cameras kept rolling. What she'd intended as a gotcha interview had become something else entirely. A family defending their own. The clip went viral within hours. But this time, the narrative shifted. This time, people saw not a controversy, but a love that transcended everything society said should divide them. 2 years later, Betty stood in the garden of the Kirkpatrick estate wearing a dress that honored both the grandmother who'd raised her and the new life she was building. The ivory gown had been designed by a black seamstress from the South Side, with African print accents woven into the train. Her hair was crowned with both traditional white flowers and the same kind of ribbon her grandmother had worn at her own wedding. Fredrick waited at the altar in a suit with a pocket square that matched Betty's dress, his eyes bright with tears he no longer tried to hide. And standing beside him as ring-bearers were Christopher, Alexander, and Benjamin, now 8 years old, wearing miniature versions of their father's suit. The ceremony wove together both families' traditions. Betty's pastor from her childhood church stood alongside Fredrick's family priest. Gospel hymns mixed with classical strings. Betty's grandmother sat in the front row next to Fredrick's mother, 2 women from completely different worlds who'd found common ground in loving the same people. When it came time for vows, the boys stepped forward with a paper they'd written themselves, their voices clear and strong. "Betty," Christopher read, We promise to help you and Daddy take care of each other like you take care of us. We promise to be good big brothers to our new sister. And we promise to remember that family isn't just about who you're born to, it's about who chooses to stay. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. 6 months later, Grace Victoria Kirkpatrick was born, a beautiful baby girl with her father's eyes and her mother's rich brown skin. The boys were obsessed with their sister, fighting over who got to hold her, reading her stories, teaching her everything they knew. "She's perfect," Benjamin whispered, gently touching her tiny hand. "We're going to protect her forever." Fredrick had channeled his transformation into something meaningful. The Victoria and Jamal Foundation provided grief counseling for families who'd lost loved ones and funded programs to place diverse, qualified caregivers in wealthy communities that had never considered looking beyond their usual networks. Betty's book, Love Doesn't Look Like What You Lost, became a bestseller. She wrote about grief, about racism, about the way society tries to dictate who deserves to love whom. She wrote about 3 boys who taught her that healing doesn't have a timeline, and a man who'd learned that being present mattered more than being perfect. The boys, now thriving 3rd graders, spoke at school assemblies about racism and inclusion. They talked openly about how their family didn't look like other families and why that made it stronger, not weaker. On the anniversary of Victoria's death, the whole family visited her grave together. Fredrick, Betty, the boys, and baby Grace in her carrier. It had become an annual tradition, but it no longer felt like a day of mourning. It felt like a celebration of how love continues. Christopher knelt by the headstone, his brothers beside him. "Hi, Mama. We brought some people for you to meet. This is Betty, and this is our baby sister Grace. We think you'd really love them, Mama," Alexander added. "Betty taught us how to remember you without being so sad all the time." Benjamin touched the flowers they'd brought. "And Mama, we're okay now. We were so scared for so long, but Betty taught us that we can love you forever and still let new people into our hearts. We thought loving someone new meant forgetting you, but it doesn't. It just means our family got bigger." Fredrick wrapped his arm around Betty's waist, Grace sleeping peacefully between them. "Thank you, Victoria," he said softly, "for giving me these incredible boys. And thank you for whatever cosmic grace sent Betty to us when we needed her most." Betty placed her hand over his heart. "She gave you more than you knew. She gave you the capacity to love this deeply, to fight this hard, to build something beautiful from something broken." As they walked back to the car, the boys ran ahead with Grace's stroller, arguing cheerfully about who got to push it. Fredrick and Betty walked hand in hand, watching their children, all of them, the ones born to him and Victoria, the one born to both of them, and the family they'd chosen to become. The story of the impossible triplets had become something else entirely. It had become proof that love transcends race, class, and every societal prejudice designed to keep people apart. It had become a testament to the truth that the most powerful families aren't built on tradition or convention. They're built on people who choose each other day after day and refuse to let the world's hatred define their worth.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Turn on your post notifications so you don't miss the next one.